welcome you all this afternoon to this IRM session from the Midlands group, all about bringing risk frameworks to life. I hope you've had opportunity to read through the blurb for the session, and it looked like something that was going to be of interest and useful for you. Very interested and excited to bring 3 different presenters, assuming the IT goes to plan. So not only Michael Gloucester, but also Mike Lawrence and Richard, who works for AECOM as well. So I'm just going to flash through a couple of quick points in terms of the structure for this particular session. And you'll have to bear with me if you can't quite see or hear me. I've got various pop-ups open on my window, which I'm hoping you can't see and aren't interrupting the screens that we've got at the moment. So by way of introductions, my name's Tom Barcham. I lead the risk work at the Salvation Army, and I'm a member of our Midlands regional group. The committee member, I should say, one of the committee members, working with other colleagues to not only put on this session, but some of the other sessions that hopefully you've been able to enjoy over the recent past as well. I'll come on to introduce our speakers shortly, but as you can see on screen, we've got Michael Gloucester, who works for NFU Mutual. We've got Michael Lawrence, who'll be speaking later, working with Rolls-Royce, and Richard Newey, working at AECOM. And I hope that kind of the session today will give us a range of different perspectives about how risk frameworks can be put into practice, but across 3 very different industries. So I'm very excited to kind of hear about those different challenges, the different benefits, and the role that risk frameworks play for each of our colleagues who'll be speaking today. The session outline is very simple, very straightforward. Essentially, again, assuming the IT goes to plan, we'll be hearing from each of the 3 speakers. So Michael first, followed by Mike, and then Richard, listening into what they've got to say and to hear how risk frameworks play an active role in their organisations. And then we'll be having a panel Q&A at the end of the session. So during the session, please do go ahead and submit any questions you've got. With a bit of luck, at least that part of our functionality should be working. So you should see a questions box on the right-hand side of your of the interface that you've got on screen at the moment, and you'll be able to use that to submit questions as we go for any of the panelists. We'll collate those, and we'll come back as a group and share reflections and hear some responses to those questions towards the latter part of the session. I also just wanted to kind of use this opportunity to remind you that if you haven't seen it already, the Midlands group has also had other recent events in the not too distant past. You can find the details for all of those on the Midlands group page on the IRM website. Most recently, back in May, we had a session on risk careers, so please do go ahead and check that out. You'll find not only the kind of the slides and the materials from that, but the video as well. The session was broadcast, and you'll be able to see and look at that at your leisure. And a very interesting session, and one of many others resources that you can find on that page as well. So please do take a look. In due course, hoping also that this session will be featured on that web page, and you'll be able to see the materials and read through. Sorry, we'll be able to review the presentation itself as well. So that's the kind of the overview of the session. That's the approach that we're going to take. As I say, very simple and straightforward. For those of you who are just joining, I see the attendee numbers have just gone up in the last few moments. We are missing a couple of our speakers just through technical reasons, and hopefully they will join us very shortly. But as luck would have it, Michael Gloucester, who is on the call, and hopefully you can see, is the first person who's going to be talking about his work. So I shall just see if I can change the slide over. Bear with me. There we go. So Michael is very much a risk expert, risk management expert, and a qualified accountant, and has worked in financial services organisations for 20 years or more. And his career has seen him working in a variety of different roles, so external audit, internal audit, and management consultancy as well, before now specialising in second line risk management in the insurance sector. So Michael's going to speak to us about how risk frameworks work at NFU, and I'm going to pass across to him so that we can hear all about that. So Michael, over to you, and let me know when you'd like me to click through the slides as well.
Great, thanks Tom. Hello. As Tom's given me a nice brief introduction there, I won't go over the same sort of introduction again. Obviously, currently working at NFU Mutual, been with NFU Mutual for about 18 months now, so had enough time to get to grips with the risk management framework here. Obviously, having worked across a number of different organisations, both directly and within consultancy roles, have experienced quite a wide range of different risk management frameworks over the years. They all tend to look a bit different, and albeit very familiar, and they all generally have the same components and the same sort of structure, particularly in the financial services industry. So if we flick on to the next slide, I'll give you a quick bit of background in terms of NFU Mutual. Obviously, I expect most of you will probably have heard of NFU Mutual. We are principally an insurance company, but a bit different to probably the majority of the insurance companies in the sector. Yes, we insure a lot of farms. We also insure quite a lot of related businesses, particularly in the rural communities, hospitality businesses, various other rural businesses quite often connected to farms. But we also insure pretty much anyone, anyone with a car, anyone with a house, anyone with a rental property. And whilst we do share our name, or a large part of our name, with the NFU, the National Farmers Union, we are a completely separate organisation. We also provide investment products, protection products, pension products, as well as financial advice through a network of agents across the country, across the United Kingdom. So as well as having a direct call centre. So quite a few different aspects to the business, all of which influence the way that we need to manage risk as an organisation. We're also a mutual company, which means we're, again, a bit different from other insurance companies, not unique. There are other mutuals, but we exist for our members rather than shareholders, meaning we have maybe a slightly different focus on and have different priorities, and a particular focus on our members and the rural communities that we serve as an organisation. So whilst we still want to make a profit, we're not about making the biggest profit possible. We want to stay in business. We want to make enough money to be able to reward our members, our customers, with quality service and good premiums and effective products. So that's a bit of background about NFU Mutual, and gives a bit of context as to the sort of risks that we might need to manage. So on the slide we have what is our sort of diagrammatic representation of our risk management framework. It probably looks similar to something, as I said, you'll have seen in your organisations. You know, everyone has a similar sort of diagram. In fact, you might see something similar later on in this session. I'm sure Michael or Richard are presenting a slide in a similar fashion, but I'm not going to talk through it all in lots of detail. My focus is for this session really is about bringing it to life from a financial services and in particular an insurance sector perspective. How is risk management different in my world, and hopefully give all of you a bit of an insight. I'm conscious that some of you may well work in financial services, but I expect we've got quite a cross section of the people attending from different industries. So how does risk management work in practice within the financial service industry? It is a complex industry. And I will talk a bit more about some of those complexities and some of the things that really shape the risk management framework. In terms of risk management and what ultimately drives risk management, we exist ultimately to help make sure the organisation achieves its strategic objectives. So top of the house is very much that focus on business strategy, and then following on from that our risk management strategy and objectives. We need to make sure, as any organisation does, that our risk management strategy is aligned to those business objectives. So for NFU Mutual, and again this will look common to lots of other financial services organisations, our focus is on staying in business, delivering profitable growth. As I said, not excessive profits, but enough profits to keep us going in as organisation and delivering for our members. We focus on being a great company to do business with. So we need to make sure that we're giving our customers what they want, the service they expect, and the products at a fair price. And when our customers need to call on us, we are there to help them through whatever challenge they're experiencing. So that's the nature of the insurance business. It's a risk management business. It exists to help people in times of need. So that's a big part of what we aim to deliver. And we also aim to be a great place to work, which is similar to lots of other organisations. But those are our three core objectives: growth, sort of being a great company to do business with, and a great place to work. So all of our risk strategy is all about identifying the things that could jeopardise that, as well as considering perhaps opportunities that may exist as well. Risk management isn't necessarily all about the bad things that could happen, but also considering opportunities as well. So in order to support that, our strategy, we define our risk appetite and set policies that help set the expectations across the business. And at the core of every risk management framework, we've got the risk management cycle, setting out how we expect the business to identify, assess, manage, monitor and report on their risks. And then underpinning that, or facilitating that, we've got our risk management system. Again, similar to many organisations, we've recently upgraded or implemented a new risk management system here at NFU Mutual, which has been a real benefit to the way that we manage risks, and has really improved and enhanced the way that we're able to analyse and report on our risks across the business. And that's a key part of any risk management framework. And then underpinning that, a risk universe. Again, a risk universe for financial services probably looks a bit different between different sectors, and indeed within financial services, and indeed between investment insurance companies. No two risk universes probably look exactly the same, but they will look very similar. So talk a little bit more about some of the key risks, the key risk categories that sit within our risk universe in a bit. And then supporting all of that, we have our governance, our risk governance structure, which for our organisation is all about embedding risk management within the first line. So we have a series of divisional risk committees that exist within our business teams, helps drive the accountability for risk management within the business, where they will discuss and perhaps escalate risks through to our group level executive risk committee, which we actually have two, one focusing on financial risk, one on operational risk. And again, I'll come back to a little bit about financial and operational risks and what that looks like in an insurance company, all of which is overseen by our board risk committee. And then alongside that, we have our risk culture, which again is probably worthy of a separate session in itself, but it's all about our organisation's natural response to risk. So when faced with a risk, what do we do? And is influenced by all sorts of things, but particularly the tone that's set by the top, the executives, individual objectives and incentives that are driven by remuneration programs and the like, and the way that we train and educate our staff as well. So in NFU Mutual, we have as you would expect, a pretty risk-averse culture. We do seek to minimise and mitigate down a lot of the risks that we're exposed to, so yeah, that's in a nutshell what our risk management framework looks like. I'm going to delve into a little bit more detail on aspects of that. So what is different about the way that we manage risk? If we move on to the next slide, thank you. A big part of the difference is about the way that we're regulated. So as an insurance company, we have not one but two main regulators. Our principal regulator, the Prudential Regulatory Authority, and also the Financial Conduct Authority. So you're possibly familiar with those, particularly if you work in financial services. There are also other regulators. We're not just focused on those two, but they're the ones that certainly occupy most of our time, and they're the ones that oversee us and provide us the authority to the approvals to operate as an insurance company, and will regulate us and keep an eye on us and make sure that we're operating effectively. There are other regulators such as the Information Commissioner and Health and Safety Executive and others. But the PRA is, as I said, our principal regulator, and they oversee the Solvency II capital regime, which is the regime by which all insurers across Europe are regulated. That may well change now that we're no longer part of the European Union, and we're waiting to see what perhaps changes come through from the PRA and the government about the new financial services regulatory regime, and particularly insurance regime. In all honesty, it probably isn't going to change drastically, but there might be some things that we do look to do a bit differently now that we're out of Europe. What all insurance companies will hold is a lot of assets, particularly life insurance companies. So as you would expect, we look after people's money, we take premiums, we hold assets in order to pay out in the future, and in some cases quite a long way into the future when people need us, be it through paying out on life insurance premiums or protection policies or pensions. As well as obviously the GI business is a bit more short term. We take premiums and pay out, annual premiums and pay out on an annual basis. So the large part of our assets are really more related to the life side of the business. But then on the other side of our balance sheet, obviously we're paying out liabilities to our customers. And in order to make sure that we've got enough money, we have to make a guess or a best estimate of how much those liabilities are likely to cost us in the future. So, my actuarial colleagues would say it's a bit more scientific than a guess, but they'll apply all sorts of actuarial black magic in the form of models and assumptions to come up with.
I can hear them now.
Feedback. Someone's just joined. And on top of that, we held a risk margin, which is designed to make sure that we've got enough money should another insurer need to come in and step in and take over. So that's what the risk margin is designed to take account of. And that'll overall makes up our technical provisions. And then the over the top of that, the total solvency capital requirement, and this is where I'm not wanting to go into an in-depth actuarial trading session, but the solvency capital requirement does have a key link into our risk management, because this is all about ensuring that all quantifiable risks within the business are being considered and is designed to make sure there's enough capital for any situation, any extreme situation, which might be which is described as effectively a 1 in 200 year scenario. So it's those extreme risks that the solvency capital requirement is designed to make sure that we're able to withstand. Anything above that is considered surplus assets, and we're then able to deploy that in terms of giving money back to our customers. If we were a private company, that could be distributions to shareholders, but also running the business, improving the business, deploying it onto projects and investments opportunities as well. At this point, I might ask a question, but I'm not sure we're doing this as a very, very interactive session. But so, thinking about what are the biggest risks to an insurance company, and in particular NFU Mutual, that would drive our solvency capital requirement. and you might be able to have a good guess, but if not, I'll put you out of your misery. We'll move on to the next slide, which shows the proportions of our solvency capital requirement. And you may or may not be surprised to see market risk as being the biggest proportion of our solvency capital requirement. That's principally because we hold such a huge proportion of assets as an insurance company, and therefore big movements in the market. This is ultimately the market risk is all about the risk that the market falls significantly and in a sustained way, and obviously the value of our assets is depressed significantly, which ultimately could impact on our ability to pay out to our customers. So that's a big focus for us as an insurance company, making sure that we understand and we're effectively managing our market risk exposure. Insurance risk, perhaps unsurprisingly, is the second biggest, or is the other really major risk that we're focused on as an insurance company. Obviously, this is the risk that our insurance liabilities that we have to pay out are more than we expect. As I mentioned before, we've got a load of actuaries who are busy sort of making estimates on how much we expect to pay out into the future on our insurance, but ultimately, if they get that wrong and we end up paying out a lot more, then this is the risk that we're looking to mitigate, and again, why we're holding a significant amount of capital on our balance sheet to make sure that we are able to continue to pay out on our insurance obligations. Now, operational risk you'll see in there is it looks like a tiny sort of slither of our risk. Now, whilst that is the way that it is, that is the way that it's calculated from a solvency capital requirement perspective, it does look very small, but and in some ways it might be hard to see how an operational risk brings down an organisation from a in a one hit and in a way that it would eat up our capital position. But operational risk can and has been shown to be a significant risk to financial services organisations. Just have to look at the likes of Northern Rock, where it's principally the biggest source of operational or an operational risk bringing down an organisation is the link to reputational risk. So it's usually an operational risk, such as a major data loss, an inability to service our customers that would end up severely damaging our reputation and ultimately leading to a situation where an organisation can no longer continue. So whilst operational risk doesn't make a large portion of our solvency capital requirement, it is a big area of focus for us in an organisation, because ultimately it could break down our organisation or any other financial services organisation, or indeed any organisation. So whilst the Solvency II regime doesn't drive us to hold a lot of capital for operational risk, it doesn't mean we're not focused on it. And arguably, Solvency II does underplay the potential impact of operational risk. But, the other sort of sources of risk that we do have, and again, whilst these are not potentially big for our organisation, there are other financial risks such as liquidity risks and credit risk, which is probably a bit more important for other financial services companies, perhaps more banks, where they'll have a requirement to be able to pay money back to customers at very short notice, and a requirement, particularly where they're lending money, to make sure they're understanding and mitigating the credit risks associated with that. So we don't have a lot of that as an insurance company, and that's sort of reflected in our capital requirement. So that gives a bit of an overview about the regulatory regime and how that links to our what we do as a business, what capital we hold, and how that links into the risk management framework. Then I'm going to delve into a little bit more detail on operational risk. Obviously, that's my area of specialism, so an area I'm very comfortable talking about. but happy to take some questions back later if anyone's got any more questions on the financial risk side of things. So if we move on to the next slide, what are the main sources of operational risk as an insurance company? This is a representation of what we currently got in our risk management system, which shows how many risks we've got recorded as well as the ratings. I thought it'd be useful just to get a sense of the magnitude. It doesn't necessarily correlate exactly to the areas or the risks that we're focused on at a group sort of top level, and we do have a sort of combination of a bottom-up approach to risk management through our risk and control self-assessment process, of which this is the outcome, as well as the top-down view of our risks as well, which is where we focus our attention, particularly at a group operational risk and board risk committee level. At a top level, the things that we are focused on a business, you won't be surprised. IT is a big area of focus, and so within that, information security, the security of our applications. This is clearly linked to, in particular, the risk of losing or the theft of customer data, and we've definitely seen some big exposures here within financial services, and with the advent of GDPR, the fact that we could be fined up to 4% of our turnover is a big risk to any organisation, but particularly a financial services organisation where we've got lots of sensitive customer data. We need to make sure that that's effectively managed. So making sure our IT estate is well protected and robust is a key focus for us as an organisation. Our ability to service our customers is obviously really key as well. It links back to one of our core objectives as an organisation. So customer and conduct risk is very key to us as an organisation. Very much the domain of the Financial Conduct Authority, and we need to make sure that we're keeping them comfortable in terms of the way that we do business. They are becoming more and more interventionist as a regulator, particularly areas more recently that they're focusing on fair pricing, making sure that we along with other insurance companies, are offering products to customers that represent a fair price for what we're providing them as a service, as a product. And particular focus has been on insurance companies who are offering discounts, for example, for new customers, but then slowly price walking them up through as they renew policies and recovering the discounts in that way, which I think rightly the FCA has called out and as not necessarily being fair to those customers that don't shop around as much as others. So that's something that the industry is very much focused on. One of many areas that the FCA is focusing on at the moment. Diversity inclusion is another area. It doesn't need too much explanation. Operational resilience is something that both the FCA and the Prudential regulator again are very focused on, and making sure that we're able to service our customers in times of severe disruption is something that we're spending quite a bit of time focusing on at the moment. All links to, it crosses over a number of different risk categories, but ultimately making sure that our customers continue to be serviced and that we're able to continue in business during those times of disruption. So all of these link back to our overall business objectives. Legal and regulatory is obviously another key area of focus for us. I've already talked a bit about the regulators, so I won't go over that in too much more detail. See, some of the categories sort of stand out as being particularly having large numbers of risks, but as I said, perhaps the number of risks and the way that this bottom-up view of our risk exposure is created doesn't necessarily correspond to top down and the view and the risk that we're focused on as a business. It's one of the tools that we use in order to understand what's going on and what the risks are that are being taken across the business, and making sure that they're adequately managed and mitigated where necessary. I think people risk is top of the record account, just because people risk exists in every aspect in every team across the business, and there's a lot of risks involved there, but perhaps not necessarily the biggest risk to our organisation. I think the biggest areas of operational risk are those that or the ones that we tend to be focusing on as a business, and our risk governance meetings are the ones that I've just mentioned. So, as I said, we very much have a top down and a bottom up. So we consider the granular risks identified and assessed across the company, and roll those up and aggregate those as a group level risk function, as well as considering the aggregation, the top level risk. What are the things that could come in and derail us as a company? All of that is then reported to our governance committees. I'll move on. I'm doing for time. Probably need to pick up the pace a bit, although we did have a bit of a late start, didn't we? So emerging risks strategic risk is something I just wanted to touch on, because it's not one of the core sort of categories of risk that I've talked about, but it's very much an area that we're focused on, along with many other organisations, and just wanted to touch on maybe some of the strategic risks to an insurance company. Obviously, this is about our risk to achieving our long-term strategic objectives, perhaps driven by poor decision making or disruption to the strategy. What are our strategic risks as an organisation? The key one being the risk that demand for our propositions from our customers is significantly reduced for whatever reasons. There could be many reasons and sources of that. We also focus on technology development as a strategic risk. The risk that disruption could come into the market from new entrants to the market, or new technologies. There's a link between strategic risk and our emerging risks, which I'm going to come on to on the next slide. And a key part of our strategic risk is also linked to our strategic change delivery program. So how we manage strategic risk is a bit more is a bit more of an art, in terms of the strategic risks are sometimes a bit harder to pin down and understand, but we need to make sure that we're monitoring and considering the alignment between our strategy and risk management, as I said at the start of the talk. So if I move on to emerging risks, and obviously hopefully everyone knows what an emerging risk. I'm not going to go back to basics on this, but these are those that we're not usually able to assess using our standard approach to risk management. There's a lot more uncertainty around these risks, about when they're going to come and hit us. So as an organisation, we use a way of looking at risks, which involves considering the sources of those risks. So actually, it might be worth just moving on to the next slide quickly, because this gives a sort of practical example of the sort of things that we're focused on as an organisation. We look at the sources of those being either political, economic, sociological, technological, regulatory, environmental. This helps us to make sure that we're considering all of the various threat vectors that might come into the organisation. Some of the main sources of emerging risk, or the main things that we're considering at the moment, obviously climate change is very much on there, thinking about the transitional impacts as well as the physical impacts of climate change is something we're focused on. And more specific to financial services organisation, the potential for radical change within the physical environment. We're seeing potential changes. A lot of changes being talked about by the government in terms of how we balance the books and pay for ourselves as a country, pay for the things that we need to, and maybe fill the black hole that's been left by COVID. So there's a bit of a risk there. So things like that, we are very much focused on. Autonomous vehicles is very high on our radar as well. From a what does that look like? What is the insurance implication of autonomous vehicles? How would that work from a liability perspective? So in terms of managing those risks, we manage them maybe a little bit differently to normal risks. We haven't necessarily got the same level of controls. We don't know when these things are going to hit us. So we're a bit more focused on maybe broader management actions and triggers that we monitor in order to understand when these things are going to come and hit us. So the key is making sure we've got clear owners for these, and ensuring that we're regularly touching base through emerging risk forums to consider these and make sure that we've got appropriate actions, and that we're keeping an eye on them and making sure that we're aware of when they may come in and have a significant impact on our business. So yeah, I've probably gone on a little bit too long, so I will nobody's been prompting me to say wrap up, so I will quickly wrap up, and hopefully that's been a useful sort of quick trot through what our risk management framework looks like, some of the aspects of our how it's different within a financial service and in particular insurance company. What are the sort of things that we do that are different in order to manage and mitigate those risks. So I think we're going to take questions at the end, so I'll pass straight back to you and Tom, and hopefully pick up some questions at the end.
That's fantastic. Thanks ever so much, Michael. Hoping you can hear me. Please do just say if you can. Yes, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, no, that was fascinating. Very interesting to hear. Thank you. And I was struck, well, not only by the diagram that's on screen, which is just a really interesting and intriguing way of presenting some of those emerging risks. But also your point about strategic risk being more of an art. I think that's something that I'm sure many other colleagues on the call can appreciate as well. As you say, Michael, we'll come back to questions at the end. So thanks for bearing with us on that, and thanks to the attendees for bearing with us. For those of you who joined at the beginning, you might have noticed that we had a small hitch on the IT side, which is rumbling on. You'll be delighted to hear. So what we don't have Michael Gloucester on the call. Sorry, Michael Lawrence on the call. Gloucester, thank you. We don't have Michael Lawrence, who is due to speak in a moment's time from Rolls-Royce here as an attendee on the call. He's had to phone in. And at the moment, we're going to try two things to see if we can bring him in. We won't try beyond those two things, because if it's not possible to bring him in to speak to his slides, then unfortunately we might need to move on. So first thing to try, Michael, if you're just able to unmute yourself on your phone, the way you've called in, can you speak now to see if you are able to kind of come across to the rest of us here? Apologies that this is a very long test. Oh,
good afternoon, Tom. Can you hear me?
Remarkably, yes, and so as well. That's brilliant. Oh, that's fantastic. The alternative, for everyone's awareness, was that I was going to have to try and unmute everybody, which I'm sure nobody wanted, and inevitably lots of interference. That's fantastic. So Michael, in that case, or Mike, sorry, I should say, let me just move us on the slides if I can coordinate myself sufficiently here. So great that you're here, Mike. So Mike is the head of risk at Rolls-Royce PLC. And prior to working at Rolls-Royce, Mike's held roles in a variety of different industries, including the energy, construction and chemicals industries. No doubt his role in the chemicals industry builds on his chemical engineering degree, which he holds alongside an MBA as well. And Mike's work kind of goes beyond those roles into the broader risk sector as well. He's been involved in the judging panels for some of the CIR risk awards, and also developing some risk materials with the Open University as well. So Mike's going to speak to us about the approach that's taken at Rolls-Royce. And Mike, hopefully the technology will hold together. I'll move us through the slides. I'm not sure you'll be able to see them, but do just shout if you'd like me to describe what we're seeing on screen, which begins with your introductory slide. So over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tom, and thanks once again to Michael. Tom, to reiterate your comments, there are a couple of things that Michael shared with us that I'll certainly be be listing and using in Rolls-Royce. I thought they were excellent, and Michael, just to support what you were saying about your business, my family and I are also customers of yours, and we can commend some of the products and services you offer. So I'll end the NFU sales pitch there, but no, thank you again for that, Michael. Good afternoon, everybody. I'll try and be quick because I know I think we're overrunning slightly. Tom, if you could move me on to my slide, which is called Agenda, and then I'll talk to that very quickly. So ladies and gentlemen, what I'm going to do over about the next 15 minutes or so is I'm going to give you a very brief overview of Rolls-Royce, who we are and what we do. I'm then going to share with you a slide which describes, or a couple of slides which describe our risk framework. So that's how we bring risk management to life within the Rolls-Royce Group. And then I'm going to focus in on one particular aspect of that for you, and just dive into that in a little bit more detail. And that's the aspect of how we understand whether or not our risk management is effective or not. And I'll share with you some of the questions that we ask to understand that. And as Michael and Tom said, I believe there's a panel Q&A at the very end. So I'll, if I could ask you to hold your questions, and we'll cover them at the end once everybody's talked. Tom, if you could move me on a couple of slides to the slide that says our vision. Are we there, Tom?
There we are. I'm hoping that's the one, Mike.
Brilliant. Wonderful. Okay, so hopefully you're looking at a slide that says pioneering the power that matters. That's our vision line, and that sort of sets the tone for everything that we do in Rolls-Royce. Our sort of unique specialism is seen as being power solutions that are difficult to do and are technologically complicated. So we pride ourselves and we specialise in things that not everybody can do, and that probably in large or small part derives from our engineering heritage and the fact that, as many of you will know, Rolls-Royce is used as a sort of a message for brand quality and engineering excellence, and that sort of theme still persists in the company today. So pioneering the power that matters is our vision, and all about providing power solutions that are difficult to do. Again, if you could move me on another slide, please, Tom. And in particular, I'm sure this will come as no great surprise to many of you. We see two trends that are really driving a lot of the growth in our businesses. They are, firstly, the increased demand for power in all its different forms and formats. And as the world as a whole gets more affluent, that demand continues to rise. But alongside that, we're also seeing an increasing demand from our customers and other stakeholders for that power to be more sustainable and greener. So those two things, an increased demand and a demand for that power to be greener and more sustainable, are two things that are driving growth in many of our markets, but are also driving the need for us to continue to innovate the technology so that we can meet the demands and requirements of those stakeholders. And Michael, if you can move me on one more. Sorry, Tom, if you could move me on one more slide, please. And just to share those difficult market segments that we tend to operate in, they are civil aerospace, which is sort of commercial airliners and private jets and small jet aircraft. They are defence applications, which includes fighter jets, transports, and some naval applications. And they also include a business that we call Power Systems, which provides reciprocating engines for all manner of applications, from everything from data centres through to yachts, through to large off-road vehicles. So a very diverse range of end applications that business business supplies and provides. So those are the markets that we serve. And Tom, if you can move me on one more. I find myself saying this a lot, and I find myself answering the question about, gosh, you must have a nice company car, by using this slide, which is unfortunately we don't make the motor cars, so they are made by another company. So the bit of Rolls-Royce that I work for doesn't make Rolls-Royce motor cars; it makes Rolls-Royce aeroplane engines that go into civil and military applications, and also the other reciprocating engines that I've just talked about. So that's who Rolls-Royce are. And what I'd like to move on to now is to talking to you a little bit about our risk framework. So Tom, if you could move me on 2 slides, please, to a slide which has got as its heading risk management.
Yep, we're on that slide now, Mike.
Brilliant. Tom, I think that might have a series of sort of a series of iterations. So if you could just move us through those till the 3 boxes in the right-hand side are all visible, assuming it's in presentation mode.
Yep, there we are. That's all on screen now for you.
Brilliant, wonderful. Thank you very much. So just to set the scene for you, Rolls-Royce has something called a governance framework. I'm sure many of the companies that you all work for have something similar. That really sets the tone from the top in terms of not only our strategy, but the way in which the business works, the policies and processes that we'll follow, and how we'll actually govern and run the business. And risk management is a key part of that governance framework, setting the scene for how Rolls-Royce is run, how we're governed, and how we're managed. Now, some of the underpinnings of that governance framework and some of the reasons why risk management is seen as so important and so critical come from things like the fact that Rolls-Royce is a listed company on the UK Stock Exchange, and because of that, we have to follow something called the UK Corporate Governance Code, which again many of you will be very familiar with. But at the heart of that, it demands that the board pay very, very close attention to the biggest risks that the company faces, those things that could affect its delivery of its strategic objectives or affect its viability. And it also requires us to make sure that we are monitoring the fact that our risks are managed effectively. We also, because of some of the markets that we operate in and the customers that we supply, we are also ISO certified, and for those of you who are also ISO certified, you'll know that ISO is increasingly risk-based. So again, that drives the need for us to understand what our risks are and how they're controlled, managed, and mitigated. And we set that out in what we call our risk framework, which essentially says we'll operate risk management across the group, so we'll understand the risks that we are facing. We'll then have an internal control system, so we'll make sure that we're clear on the controls that we've put in place to manage and mitigate those risks down to an acceptable level. And then around that, we'll have assurance, so we'll have second and third line assurance to check that those controls are actually in place and that they're operating effectively, and that we are actually managing the risks down to the level that we do deem is acceptable in practice. So in summary, that is our risk management framework, and that's what we operate. For those of you who are also in the UK and are similar to Rolls-Royce, we're also paying a keen eye to the current consultation that the UK government have got out, which I believe is titled Restoring Trust in Audit and Corporate Governance. So we're also keenly awaiting to understand what they're going to come up with in terms of UK SOX, as I've heard it branded as. So how some of those corporate governance arrangements that we currently follow might evolve or change. So if I do have the opportunity to speak to you in future, we might then go on and talk about UK SOX and how that's changing things. But that's one for the future. Tom, if you could move me on one more, please. I liked Michael's slide that he shared earlier about his his risk management framework. This is the Rolls-Royce version of that same thing. And again, I think it's got many of the same hallmarks as that Michael shared from NFU. Just to call out some of the key bits, I'm sure they're fairly common, but we have a standard risk process that operates across the whole of the Rolls-Royce group. We have a hierarchy of risks, so material risks can flow up from our different business units and through our business operating units up to the group and the board. And similarly, we cascade some of our group principal risks back down through our business units and into our operational units to make sure that we've got that full coverage of some of the risks that we're expecting to see. We've also got governance in place with a series of committees, both that operate at the board level and into our businesses and sub-business units. And again, they're the sort of the oversight mechanisms that we use to make sure that we're managing our risks effectively. We have a number of other supporting tools that I'm not going to go into in any great length here, but tools and guidance and templates and things like that, all of the standard stuff you'd expect. I'm going to come on a little bit later and talk about the measures of effectiveness. So more on that in a moment. But Tom, if you would move me on one more, please. I think the key thing that I would just say to you all about bringing that framework to life and what I found in my time at Rolls-Royce is particularly important is it's less about having the best tools and the best approach, and it's more about actually working with the people, the risk owners, the control owners, and the assurance providers to make sure that they are displaying and discharging that ownership, that they're taking accountability for managing their risks, and particularly when you get to higher up in the organisation, that they're displaying the right behaviours, they're leading by example. I think a lot of the codes refer to it as tone from the top, but that certainly in my experience in Rolls-Royce is tremendously powerful in actually ensuring that good risk management happens lower down in the organisation. And so certainly having the risks overseen and reviewed by our board and board committees regularly is incredibly helpful and very, very powerful for me in making sure that we set that right tone and we are clear on the importance of managing risk well. But I'm sure we can come on and talk about that when we get to the Q&As. But yes, so it's all about the people. It's probably the key message in terms of bringing that framework to life. Tom, if you could move me on two more, please. And hopefully there's a slide there with a quote.
Yeah, there is that.
Brilliant. So this is sort of a bit of a bit similar to that thing you'll have heard before, which is if you measure it, you manage it. But one of the key things that we've tried to do with understanding are we managing our risks effectively is to set out what are the questions that we want people to be able to answer and provide evidence as part of answering those questions to confirm to the second and third line teams that they are managing their risks effectively, and also to give the first line a very, very clear view of the standard that we would expect them to be able to operate to in terms of what does it mean to manage your risks effectively. So what I'm going to come on and do now is just share with you those questions that we have set out and that we use across Rolls-Royce to understand, are we managing our risks effectively? And just to set the context for you, we use these questions for all of our risks, irrespective of whether they're strategic, financial, operational. We use them across the whole of the group, and we use them in our recording and reporting up to and including our board level to try and answer that question of, are we managing our risks effectively? So Tom, if you would move me on to, I think, what is the final slide in my pack for today. what you're hopefully looking at is a slide that says on the left-hand side what it means to manage risk effectively. And what we've done to that end is we've set out 8 questions that we would expect anybody who owns a risk to be able to answer. We would expect them to be able to answer the questions affirmatively. So yes, I have got this in place, and we'd expect them to be able to evidence to that fact. And the way we structured them, and hopefully you'll see the theme here, is to link them back to I think probably what the first content slide I shared with you was, the governance framework, so risks, control and assurance, and then to build in some of the other important elements of our risk framework. So incidents and learning from incidents, making sure that we are communicating in a timely and appropriate way to the right people about the level of risk that we're facing, and potentially what you might argue the most important of the questions is, are we actually managing our risks down to a level that is within our appetite? Or you could say if you wanted to put that another way, are we prepared to tolerate the level of risk that we're actually taking when we've managed these risks? And so that's the format of our questions, is to align with some of those things in our framework that I've already described. So Tom, if you would just do the first slide transition, please.
Yeah, we got the
So
first.
the first set of, brilliant, thank you. So the first thing is all about the risk. So have we actually clearly described the risk? Now in Rolls-Royce, and again, I'm sure many of you use the same thing, we encourage people to use a bow tie format, so to understand the root causes of the risk, and all of the consequences of the risk. So that's what I mean by description. Back to my slide about ownership and accountability. Are we clear who owns the risk? Are they accountable for it? Do they feel accountable for it? That's something we found is key to actually managing our risks effectively, hence why it's asked here. And have we done a proper job of quantifying the risk? So do we understand the quantum? Do we understand the impact of the risk if it were to occur, and how likely it is that risk will occur? So those are the things that we'd expect people to be able to confirm that they've got in place and provide evidence for when we're describing our risks. Tom, if you do the next transition for me, please. So the next one is question number 4, which is about controls. Now, there's a lot in this one question, as many of you will appreciate, but essentially what we're asking is, are you clear on the current controls that you have in place to mitigate the risk? And have you concluded that those controls are effective? So what we're looking for there is a good description of the internal control environment and some rigor on the testing or the attestation of those controls to make sure that the controls we've got are working effectively. Tom, if you'd move me on one more, please, which should hopefully unhide question 5. Question 5 is all about assurance. So that says, who is providing independent assurance over or for this risk, and how are we taking that into account when we're concluding on whether our controls are effective or not? So this essentially is bringing about another element of our governance framework, which is the 3 lines of defence, which again I'm sure many of you will be familiar with and will operate. This is asking, to what extent has that 3 lines of defence been deployed for the risk that we're thinking about here? And then, Tom, final transition. The last 3 questions are those other elements of the risk framework that I've talked about. So question 6 is about learning from incidents. So, and they could be incidents within the company. They could be, either in the same business unit or in a sister business unit, or alternatively outside of the Rolls-Royce group of companies. But essentially what this is trying to do is to drive that learning from experience. So have we actually captured our incidents or our near misses? and how have we incorporated those in both the assessment of our the quantification of our risk, of how likely is it to happen, and the size of that impact, and how have we factored that into driving improvements to our controls. Question 7 is arguably the most important question of them all. That's, is the risk currently within appetite? And if not, do we have a credible plan to bring it back within appetite? So sort of 2 questions there. And again, in terms of credible plan, the types of things that we're looking for and challenging there is you know, is the plan actually funded? Is it resourced? Are we clear on how long that plan will take to come to fruition? And is that timescale tolerable and acceptable? And last but by no means least, it's about saying, are we actually communicating and reporting these things to our to the right place in our organisation's hierarchy, so that the right people are aware of them? And as I said previously, that we have, through our governance arrangements, the facility to speak to and engage with the main board, because they are very, very keen on these topics. We do this process. We operate these questions for across, say, all of our business units, for all of our group, the biggest risks across the group, and including all of our group principal risks. And reporting on this and the summarisation of this we use to answer one of our corporate governance questions, which is, have we got an effective system of risk management and internal controls in place? Tom, you've been great at driving the slides, so thank you again for that. Thank you for bearing with me. That was all I wanted to say for now, but hopefully, just in summary, I've been through who roles for us are, what we do, what our risk framework looks like. We've delved into one element of that framework about how we measure, whether we're measuring our risks effectively. And the key message around all of this for me, is all about ownership and accountability, and making sure that risk owners in particular are clear on that, and are clear on their accountabilities for managing the risks effectively. And to that end, we found these 8 questions a really powerful tool in reinforcing that message and giving them a structure to hang some of their accountabilities off. So Tom, with that said, I'm going to hand back to you, and I'm happy to take questions in the Q&A later.
That's fantastic. Thanks ever so much, Mike. That was a really helpful overview. Those 8 questions are really very striking in terms of their simplicity, but also the coverage that they give as well. So I can see how they can be a really powerful tool, I'm sure, in your organisation. Just to give people on the call the heads up, I think we may be a little pressed for time. We do need to wrap up at 1:30, so there may be quite a limited opportunity for Q&A at the end. So I'm going to move it straight across to our final presenter. That's Richard Newey. If I can get my slides sorted, here we go. So Richard's been involved in the construction industry for more than 35 years, is now working at AECOM, and it looks like he might just about be coming up on screen as well, which is fantastic. Richard kind of applies his risk management approach not only in work, which I'm sure we'll hear a little bit about, but also in his kind of significant athletic achievements as well, which has included summiting Everest. It's included the race across America, a fairly substantial cycling and endurance challenge, and in multiple Ironman World Championships as well. And I think in a few moments' time we might hear a little bit more about one of his more recent athletic achievements. But I guess the main thing to say is that Richard attributes some of his success in those areas to truly effective risk management as well. So I'm going to hand across to you, Richard. I'll carry on driving the slides, so just let me know when you'd like me to click through. Over to you. I can't hear you, no.
Okay, can you hear me okay now?
Yes, got you now, Richard. Thank you.
All right, perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. Tom, if you can flip to the next slide, thank you. Okay, and perhaps to the next one as well.
Okay, I think there's a little lag, but they should be coming up now, Richard.
Yeah, okay, so I'll try and move through reasonably quickly, so we do have an opportunity at the end for a few questions for the panel. So I'm going to talk very briefly in terms of risk and my certainly early career in risk and my understanding of it, but quite quickly I'm going to move on to risk in practice and perhaps my personal life, some of the things that I think do make a difference and how we can then apply that in an enterprise program and project context. So I'm going to try and keep it a little bit different, and then obviously Q&A at the end, so if we can move on. Okay, so introduction we sort of touched on already, and some of the points at the bottom I will bring out in the discussions as we move through. But again, Tom, if we can just flip to the next slide. Central limit theorem. So I remember when I first started in risk, some of the early presentations that I went to within the business that I worked for. So at the time that was Davis Langdon, which then subsequently became ACOM. People were talking about central limit theorem. And I just thought it was incredibly boring, to say the least, and perhaps underpins how I feel, or how I felt at the time, and perhaps how some of us feel, that risk gets a bad name, that we get tied up into massive amounts of detail and hundreds of risks, and we don't positively influence projects in the way that we want to. Certainly in those days, I don't know how many presentations I went along to and listened to stuff about this, and there was endless arguments whether it was applicable or not, but it didn't really make too much of a difference. And to me, and I think to many of us on this call, risk when it's at its best really positively influences projects, and arguably is probably the key discipline that makes a difference in terms of determining success and potentially failure. So I'm going to apply that in some of the things that I've done in my life, because I think it tries to keep things relatively simple and straight to the point. If we could move on, Tom. And apologies to anybody that really loves central limit theorem, I'm not going to talk about it. So shall I give a little bit of context here? Interestingly, I've not decided not to talk about Everest, because that's in a context of perhaps some of these events. Everest is a little bit easier, albeit it has various risks associated with it. Race Across America is quite different. So when I did this, which was now 10 years ago, at the time, only 3 UK people had actually managed to finish over a 30-year period. And now in 40 years, I think we're at 7 people that have managed to finish, and most people don't finish. So Race Across America starts on the west coast of America, and you ride to the east coast. So that's 3,020 miles. And when the clock starts, it starts and it doesn't stop until you cross the finish line. It's not self-supported. You have a team with you, and they follow you across, and they provide food and they provide everything for you. Rather simplistically, all I've got to do is ride a bike. And I guess that term simplistically is really important, because sometimes I think risk really overcomplicates things. And in this context, and when you're applying it in a personal context, I think keeping it simple is really important. So understanding what success is and how it influences your strategy is really important. And for this race, most people don't finish. So bearing that in mind, how does that influence your strategy? How are you going to race this? How are you going to move forwards? And I find in an enterprise context or a program context, we sometimes skip that step, and really understanding what success looks like and how and what are the key risks to success is really key. It's not a case of having a myriad of risks that are often duplicated on the register. So in this context, finishing ultimately was the goal. and therefore that influenced the strategy. For the first half of this race, we did keep it simple. It didn't matter if I got overtaken or what happened. And forgive if this sounds a bit strange to say this, all I had to do was get on my bike and ride 300 miles a day, which would take about 21 hours, sleep for an hour and a half, eat something, get back on the bike and do the same thing again. So it was relatively straightforward, albeit obviously that's quite difficult to execute. And to achieve that, you need to train and everything that goes into it to get to the start line. But the strategy for the race was quite simple. It was only then later in the race when they advised what the situation was, where I was on the leaderboard, how many people had already dropped out, because it's too easy to get tied up in the detail of racing and going fast and burning your matches early, when really the overall aim is to finish. So keeping it simple is really important. The other thing to talk about perhaps is understanding what the key risks are in terms of potential failure. This slide perhaps does say what one of the key risks are, because one of the key risks, bizarrely, is getting run over. And as this slide actually shows, at least half a dozen racers in RAM have got run over by their own crew, who fall asleep at the wheel and then they run you over, which isn't great, I have to say. Team selection is really important, and how you select the team can be based on from a risk context of how do they deal with stress, how do they react under pressure, and how are they going to operate in an environment that in this instance, a 10-day period, how are they going to operate? Because they have to drive vehicles across America and drive 300 miles a day, following a cyclist that perhaps at certain times isn't going to be quite compos mentis, is struggling, and perhaps really interestingly at the moment, focusing on the mental side of things is really important. So understanding how to spot when people are struggling from a mental perspective. So that's not only me as a bike, but those around them from a team perspective. And going into that and having mitigations in place of how we deal with that. So if they would see that I was struggling, they would understand that, and they would put in place a set procedure of trying to raise my morale and understanding what was happening. I guess the thing to say here as well is there is an expectation that things will go wrong. And if you have that expectation, then you can do something about it and plan accordingly. In my experience, projects and programs, they think everything's going to go right, and then they don't really plan for that. So in this context, trying to understand what are the key things that may go wrong and react accordingly. And also flipping that round to the opportunity that may also bring. Because let's be clear, when you're doing an event like this, everybody's struggling, and how can you actually react to that and perhaps turn that into a positive? Tom, can we flip to the next slide, which is much more recent? So the Tour de Jean, I'll give you a little bit of context. I finished this a week ago last Friday. So this is a run. So this is 360 kilometers running across the Italian, or running around the Italian Alps, 30 kilometers of ascent and descent. Same as RAM, really. Most people don't finish. Again, sleep deprivation is an issue. Forgive me, I'll put the slide in there. That's about 270 kilometers with 5 hours sleep after about 4 days, I think, in the race. This you don't have a crew with you, but you do have aid stations along the way, and you're following a prescribed route. I'll put the sunrise in to sort of show that it's not all sort of suffering as such. But again, really understanding what does success look like for this, and what is your appetite to really roll the dice here? How much are you willing to put on the line and understanding what the success is. So for here, yes, finishing was important, but also trying to be as high up as you could was important, and that brings a greater risk into the equation. And when you consider the risks for this race, injury, for example, sleep deprivation, mental aspects, and clearly there's a physical aspect of the mental side of it as well when you're really suffering, I decided that I would take greater risk on this and I would push it to see how close I could take it. So from a sleep deprivation, I did push it to the edge, and at the end I would have to sleep for 50, take power naps on the trail to address that, but that was the plan. I understood that and knew that would happen. Unfortunately, I did pick up an injury, but then having a plan on how to deal with that injury and how you'd address that, and perhaps that changes your strategy, and sometimes it does positively influence your strategy. And the other aspect in terms of opportunity, and I touched on it on the last slide, when it gets tough, how can you exploit that? And actually practicing that beforehand to really understand how you can deal with a situation when it gets tough, and again, the expectation when things are going to go wrong. And I'm sure many of us here have undertaken sporting events, and perhaps can consider this. So you can apply it at any context. So if we can move on, I won't talk about endurance events anymore. Okay, so this, in practice, this very much mirrors what I was trying to describe there, really understanding what the strategy and organisation is. How much appetite do you have? What is your tolerance towards risk? And having a structure and roles and responsibilities clear. I will speed through this given the time, but having a clear risk process, understanding what they are, and strong mitigations in place. And here at ACOM, we try and make sure that risks are really well described and clearly articulated, but not wordy. We don't like lots of words. We like it specific and to the point, and have something that really gets to the nub of it, that anybody could read through and understand what the issue is. And therefore, when you articulate it like that, you get the right information to decision makers at the right time. And we try and have people that will drive that through and actually proactively try and drive the decision making, as opposed to just getting the information through. Risk metrics, I probably don't need to dwell on that too much, but forward looking to try and identify when things go wrong is really key. And really going into projects and programs and acting in a consulting based approach, where we are going in and advising clients what the key risks are, and not just, so it's very much a push as opposed to a pull. And then of course the final point, this is very cyclical, so lessons learned and learning from that data in a comprehensive way. If we can move on, Tom. And I will speed through these last two slides. So from us, from an ACOM perspective, we try and maximise the chance of success on all our projects, programs, and enterprises. And we try and very much have a personable risk proposition. So it's about people, but in a team context. And the way we do that, again, if we can move on, Tom. Is through these areas, really. We try and have a strong focus on team. So that's formal and informal ways of sharing information and working really strongly as a team. We try and raise the level of risk awareness across the whole business. And even though I look after Europe, we actually share information across Asia Pacific, America, India. So we try and share that knowledge. So we're trying to raise the whole awareness and knowledge of risk. So people in their day-to-day lives on projects and programs will understand how they manage risk, and that it's much more than a process, but a culture of the way they do things. And they view risk both positive and negative. And we've had quite a high degree of success in that area in raising profile. And we've undertaken internal seminars where we've had 150, 200 people dial in, which has been great. We're proud of what we do, and we're not ashamed to try and drive that forwards across the business with a real strong continuous improvement approach. And we try and make sure we have really brilliant communicators that can really proactively drive projects and programs and influence, but not in a dynamic way, but not a blunt or aggressive way, but really try and influence and inspire and motivate people. And I think that's the last slide. Next, we've got questions, which I think we've got 4 minutes of questions.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Richard. That's excellent and really interesting. Different take, I guess, on the risk management approach that you've used in a few different settings. So really, really grateful for that. I'm just going to move us along one side. So just as Richard's touched on there, we have only got a couple of minutes, unfortunately. We have had a number of questions that have been asked, but I don't think we're going to have time to go through more than perhaps just one of those. So I might just I kind of ask the one that has been flagged, or one of the ones that has been flagged, for any of the panelists to respond to. And that's really, obviously, you know, there are risk frameworks that are in place across each of the organisations. We've heard about them to differing extents. How much has COVID led you to need to go back and rethink some of those fundamentals around how those frameworks are put together? Or have you found that the frameworks have kind of adapted sufficiently and they've worked despite the substance and the significance of the challenges that COVID's presented over the last couple of years? I don't know whether any of the panelists wanted to chip in there. I see, Michael, you've taken yourself off mute. So
I'm happy to give a very brief, quick response on that one. I think, in all honesty, it's not really led us to change anything very much. It's, you know, we've been able to, it's operationally we've had to do things differently, but from a risk management framework perspective, it's just another, you know, another aspect of a risk that we were already managing from a, you know, we already had it on our emerging risk register, so, you know, we'd already considered pandemic from a pure sort of operational perspective. Yes, we went out and asked the business, does this have any impact on your sort of immediate sort of concerns about your risk profile or your control environment? But it's all within the context of the existing risk management framework. So it really didn't really require a rethink. It's not fundamentally a new risk that nobody's ever thought of. So that's my take on it.
thank you, Michael. I don't know, Richard or Mike, if you're still on the call and able to unmute yourself, if you had anything you wanted to share.
Tom, it's Mike.
Yeah, I agree with Mike.
Oh, go on, Richard.
You go, Mike.
No, go on, after you.
Okay, so from our perspective, we've not really had to change frameworks at all. So I'd echo Michael's view on it was identified on a number of our registers and certainly emerging risks. So I think it highlighted that we had things right in the first place in terms of the frameworks.
Yeah, and Tom, from a Rolls-Royce perspective, I mean, we very similar answer to the other guys. We had pandemic on our risk register. The pandemic did have a material effect on our business. I think what that means for me is it's changed some of the risks, the nature of the risks that we now face, and the significance of those risks. But the framework has actually proved remarkably robust and effective. You know, and I don't think that will change. But yeah, some of the risks that we call out within our framework have changed, but the framework itself has been effective at helping us through that.
Excellent, thank you. That's those are all interesting insights to hear, and I guess, yeah, you know, a reflection of one of the most substantial challenges that there could be. Of course, the risk environment that we're working within has changed significantly over the last 18 months. But if the fundamentals are there, you know, and they continue to work and operate despite everything that's changed over this period of time, then I guess it goes to show that that's a robust and solid framework to begin with. I think we are out of time, sadly. Thank you to people who have asked the questions, and apologies that we've not been able to ask all of those. But nonetheless, I hope everyone has enjoyed hearing from Michael, Mike and Richard about a variety of different applications of risk frameworks in each of their respective industries. I've certainly found it fascinating, and pass on my significant thanks to each of the panelists for sharing their time and their slides and their insights with all of us. If anybody wishes to kind of provide feedback about the session after this, you'll be able to find various contact details on the Midlands IRM page, which is up there on the IRM's website as well. So please do feel free to kind of share any thoughts. And of course, we're always interested if there's views about future sessions that may be of interest and relevance across the Midlands community. So once again, thank you ever so much to Michael, Richard and Mike. I do appreciate your time. Thanks to the attendees today, and hopefully have opportunity to join another IRM session in the not too distant future. Thank you ever so much.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.